Hi, boys and girls. Helen McCrane here again, and today I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're in New York City. Now the year is 1922, and you're standing on the sidewalk, not too far from Times Square, in front of 59 West 44th Street. The Algonquin Hotel. And it's lunchtime. Now, I want you to imagine you're passing through the hotel doors and you're crossing the lobby on your way to the Rose Room. You enter and you wend your way amongst the tables till you get to that most famous, well, some might say infamous table of them all, the Algonquin Round Table. Now, let's see. Who are your luncheon companions today? Well, there's Robert Benchley and Alexander Wolcott, the critic, and let's see. Oh, that guy just down the table from him. That's the actor, Harpo Marx. And that tall drink of water on your right, that's Georges Kaufman, the playwright. And on your left, Harold Ross, founder and editor-in-chief of the New Yorker magazine. And presiding over us all today is none other than the queen of the Algonquin Round Table, Mrs. Dorothy Parker, who is, at present, regaling us all with tales of men she's not married to. Men I'm not married to. No matter where my route may lie, no matter whither I repair, in brief, no matter how or why or when I go, the boys are there. On lane and byways, street and square, on alley, path, and avenue, they seem to spring up everywhere. The men I am not married to. I watch them as they pass me by. At each, in wonderment I stare, but for heaven's grace, I cry, there goes the guy whose name I'd wear. They represent no species rare. They walk and talk as others do. They're fair to see, yeah, but only fair, the men I am not married to. I'm sure that to a mother's eye is each potentially a bear. But though at home they rank ace high, no change of heart could I declare. Yet worry silvers not their hair. They deck them not with sprigs of rue. It's curious how they do not care, the men I am not married to. Au revoir. In fact, if they'd a chance to share their lot with me a lifetime through, they'd doubtless tender me the air, the men I am not married to. Oh boy, people say of Freddie. You just ought to meet him sometime. He's a riot, that's what he is. More fun than a goat. Other and more imaginative souls may play whimsically with the idea and say that he's more fun than a barrel of monkeys. Still, others go at the thing from a different angle and refer to him as being as funny as a crutch. But I always feel myself that they stole that line from Freddie. The satire. That is his dish. And there you have, really, one of Freddie's greatest crosses. People steal his stuff right and left. He will say something one day, and the next it'll be as good as all over the city. Time after time, I have gone to him and told him that I have heard lots of vaudeville acts using his comedy, but he just puts on the most killing expression and says, "Oh, say not suchly," in that way of his. And of course, it gets me laughing so that I can't say another word about it. And that is the way he always is, just laughing it off when he's told that people are using his best lines without even so much as a word of acknowledgement. I never hear anyone say, "There is such a thing as being too good-natured," but that I think of Freddie. You never knew anyone like him at a party. Things will be dragging along the way they do at the beginning of the evening, with the early arrivals sitting around asking one another, have they seen anything good at the theater lately? And is it any wonder there's so much sickness around with the weather so changeable? Yeah, the party will be just about plucking at the coverlet when in will breeze Freddie. And from that moment on, the evening is little short of a whirlwind. Often and often I have heard him called the life of the party, and I have always felt that there is not the least bit of exaggeration in the expression. But what I envy about Freddie is that poise of his. He can come right into a room full of strangers and be just as much at home as if he had gone through grammar school with them. Yeah, he smashes the ice all to nothing the moment he's introduced to the other guests by pretending to misunderstand their names and calling them something else entirely different, keeping a straight face all the time, as if he never realized there was anything wrong. Great many people say he puts them in mind of Buster Keaton that way. And he is never at a loss for a screaming crack. If the hostess asks him to have a chair, Freddie comes right back at her with, "No thanks, we have chairs at home." And if the host offers him a cigar, he will say, just like a flash, "What's the matter with it?" And if one of the men borrows a cigarette and a light from him, Freddie will say in that dry voice of his, "Do you want the coupons too?" Of course his wit is pretty fairly caustic, but no one ever seems to take offense at it. I suppose there's everything in the way he says things. That he has a repertory of song numbers, too. And he gives them without accompaniment. And every song has a virtually unlimited number of verses, after each one of which Freddie goes conscientiously through the chorus. There is one awfully clever one, a big favorite of his, with the chorus rendered in a different way each time, showing how they sang it when Grandma was a girl, and how they sing it in Gay Paris, and how a cabaret performer would do it. Then there are several along the general lines of Casey Jones, and a few in which the lyric of the chorus consists of the syllables ha, ha, ha. The idea is that the audience will get laughing along with the singer. Oh, and if there is a piano in the house, oh, Freddie can tear things even wider open. Now, there may be many more accomplished musicians, but nobody can touch him as far as being ready to oblige goes. There's never any of this hanging back and waiting to be coaxed, or protesting that he hasn't touched a key in months. He just sits right down and does all his specialties for you. He is particularly good at doing Dixie with one hand and Home Sweet Home with the other. And Joseph Hoffman himself never tied Freddie when it comes to giving an imitation of a fife and drum corps. Approaching, passing, and fading away into the distance. But it is when refreshments are served that Freddie reaches the top of his form. He always insists on helping to pass plates and glasses, and when he gets a big armful of them, he pretends to stumble. Oh, it is as good as a play to see the hostess's face. And then he tucks his napkin into his collar, sits there just as solemnly as if he thought that were the thing to do. Yeah, or perhaps he will vary that one by folding the napkin into a little square and putting it carefully into his pocket, as if he thought it was a handkerchief. Oh, and you just ought to see him making believe that he swallowed an olive pit. And the remarks that he makes about the food, oh, I do wish I could remember how they go. He is funniest, though, it seems to me, when he's pretending that the lemonade is intoxicating and that he feels its effects pretty strongly. Oh, when you have seen him do this, it will be small surprise to you that Freddie is such a demand for social functions. But Freddie is not one of those humorists who perform only when out in society. All day long he's bubbling over with fun. And the beauty of it is that he is not a mere theorist as a joker. Practical. That's Freddie all over. If he isn't sending long telegrams, collect, to his friends, then he's sending them packages of useless groceries, COD. A telephone is just so much meat to him. I don't believe anyone will ever know how much fun Freddie and his friends get out of Freddie's calling them up and making them guess who he is. When he really wants to extend himself, he calls up in the middle of the night and says he's the wire tester. He uses that one only on special occasions, though. It's pretty elaborate for everyday use. But day in and day out, you can depend upon it that he's putting over some uproarious trick with a dribble glass, or a loaded cigar, or a pencil with a rubber point. And you can feel completely sure that no matter where he is or how unexpectedly you may come upon him, oh, Freddie will be right there with a funny line or a comparatively new story for you. And that is what people marvel over when they are talking about him. How he is always just the same. It is right there, really, that they put their finger on the big trouble with him. Dad, you just ought to meet Freddie sometime. He's a riot. That's what he is. More fun than a circus. Mortimer had his picture taken in his dress suit. As long as you keep him well inland, Raymond will never give any trouble. But when he gets down to the seashore, he affects a bathing suit with little sleeves. On wading into the sea, ankle deep, he leans down and carefully applies handfuls of water to his wrists and forehead. It's curious, but no one seems to be able to recall what Charlie used to talk about before the country went what may be called, with screaming effect, dry. Of course, there must have been a lot of unsatisfactory weather even then, and I don't doubt that he slipped in a word or two when the talk got around to the insanity of the then current styles of women's dress. But though I have taken up the thing in a serious way and have gone about among his friends making inquiries, I cannot seem to find that he could ever have got any farther than that in the line of conversation. In fact, well, he must have been one of those strong, silent men in the old days. Now, those who have not seen him for several years would be in a position to be knocked flat with a feather if they could see what a regular little chatterbox Charlie's become. Say what you will about Prohibition, and who has a better right, you would have to admit, if you knew Charlie, that it has been the making of him as a conversationalist. He never requires his audience to do any feeding for him. Needs no careful leading around of the subject, no tactful questions, no well-timed allusions to get him nicely loosened up. All you have to say is good evening to him. Ask him how everybody over at his house is getting along, and give him a chair. Though this last is not essential. And Silver-tongued Charlie is good for 3 hours straight on where he's getting it, and how much he has to pay for it, and what the chances are of his getting hold of a couple of cases of genuine pinch bottle, along around the middle of next week. I have known him to, to hold entire dinner parties, spellbound, from cocktails to finger bowls, with his monologue. Now, I would be well down among the last when it came to wanting to give you the impression that Charlie has been picked for the all-American alcoholic team. And despite the wetness of his conversation, he's just a nice, normal, conscientious drinker, willing to take it or let it alone in the order named. I don't say he would not be able to get along without it, but neither do I say that he doesn't get along perfectly splendidly with it. I don't think I ever saw anyone who could get as much fun as Charlie can out of splitting the 18th Amendment with a friend. Yeah. It is wonderful how Charlie's circle of acquaintances has widened during the last 2 years. There's nothing so broadening as prohibition. Among his new friends, he numbers a conductor on a train that runs down from Montreal, and a young man who owns his own truck, and a group of chaps who work in drugstores. And I don't know how many proprietors of homey little restaurants in the basements of brownstones. Now, some of them, though, have turned out to be but fair weather friends, unfortunately. There was one young man whom Charlie had looked upon practically as a brother, who went particularly bad on him. It seems he had taken a pretty solemn oath to supply Charlie, as a personal favor, with a case of real Gordons, which he said he was able to get through his high social connections on the other side. Now, when what the young man called a nominal sum was paid, and the case was delivered, its bottles were found to contain a nameless liquor. Though those of Charlie's friends who gave it a fair trial suggested Storm King as a good name for the brand. Charlie has never laid eyes on the young man from that day to this. He is still unable to talk about it without a break in his voice. Now, as he says, and quite rightly too, it was the principle of the thing. But for the most part, his new friends are just the truest pals a man ever had. In more time than it takes to tell it, Charlie will keep you right abreast of them, sketching for you how they are and what they're doing and what their last words to him were. But Charlie can be the best of listeners, too. Just tell him about any little formula you may have picked up from making it at home, and you will find you have the most sympathetic of audiences, and one who will even go to the flattering length of taking notes on your discourse. Relate to him tales of unusual places where you have heard that you can get it, or of grotesque sums that you have been told have been exchanged for it, and he will hang on your every word, leading you on, asking intelligent questions, and encouraging you by references to like experiences of his own. But don't let yourself get carried away with success and attempt to branch out into other topics, or you will lose Charlie in a minute if you try. But that, now that I think on it, would probably be the very idea you would have in mind. Lloyd wears washable neckties. You would really be surprised at the number of things that Henry knows just a shade more about than anybody else does. Naturally, he can't help realizing this about himself, but you mustn't think for a minute that he has let it spoil him. On the contrary, as the French so well put it, he has no end of patience with others, and he is always willing to oversee what they are doing and to offer them counsel. When it comes to giving his time and his energy, there is nobody who could not admit that Henry is generous. To a fault, I have even heard people go so far as to say. If, for instance, Henry happens to drop in while four of his friends are struggling along through a game of bridge, he does not cut in and take a hand, thereby showing up their playing in comparison to his. Oh, no. Henry draws up a chair and sits looking on with a kindly smile. Now, of course, now and then he cannot restrain a look of pain or an exclamation of surprise or even a burst of laughter when he listens to the bidding. But he never interferes. Frequently, after a card has been played, he will lean over and, in a good-natured way, tell the player what he should have done instead, and how he might just as well throw his hand down then and there. But he always refuses to take any more active part in the game. Occasionally, when a uniquely poisonous play is made, I have seen Henry thrust his chair aside and pace about in speechless excitement. But for the most part, he's admirably well self-controlled. He always leaves with a few cheery words for the players, urging them to keep at it and not let themselves get discouraged. And that is the way Henry is about everything. He will stroll over to a tennis court and stand on the sidelines at what I am sure must be great personal inconvenience, calling words of advice and suggestion for sets at a stretch. I have even known him to follow his friends all the way around a golf course, offering constructive criticism on their form as he goes. I tell you, in this day and generation, you don't find many people who will go as far out of their way for their friends as Henry does. And I am far from being the only one who says so, too. I have often thought that Henry must be the boy who got up the idea of leaving the world a little better than he found it. Yet he never crashes in on his friends' affairs. Oh, no, only after the thing is done does he point out to you how it could have been done just a dash better. After you have signed the lease for the new apartment Henry tells you where you could have got one cheaper and sunnier. After you were all tied up with the new firm, Henry explains to you where you made your big mistake in leaving the old one. Uh, it is never any news to me when I hear people telling Henry that he knows more about more things than anybody they ever saw in their lives. And I don't remember ever having heard Henry give them any argument on that one. After 2 drinks, Joe wanted to go up and bat for the trap drummer. After he'd had 3 drinks, he began to get personal about the unattractive color of the necktie worn by the strange man at the next table. Oh, God. Oliver had a way of dragging his mouth to one side by means of an inserted forefinger, explaining to you, meanwhile, in necessarily obscured tones, the work which his dentist had just accomplished on his generously displayed back teeth. Albert sprinkled powdered sugar on his sliced tomatoes.